trip to outer space.
Come along quietly or not.
You can have all the talent in the world and never get anywhere.
Some artist baked a hook to let you bite upon it.
And now, without further ado,
Coming to you loud and clear.
Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Planet Shivers podcast. I'm Albert Shivers, and I'm here with Isaac Wilson on sound. And our special guest today is just unbelievable artist. You see his work, he blows you away. Doug Gilbert. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you, Albert. Glad to be here.
So I guess we'll just jump right into it. And what made you start off in art?
You know, art has always been, drawing has always been part of my life. So I can't remember when I started drawing. I was 4 or 5 years old or whatever. And it's always been an interest to me. I always had this desire to kind of make images on paper. There wasn't much art education in school. I grew up in Manhattan.
Okay.
Until I was 8 years old. Then there wasn't much. I don't remember any encouragement really in the schools to do that. There were a couple of art classes, but I did live near the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we used to go there quite a bit. So I was exposed to art from a very young age. And in those days, 1950s,
Right.
People were not so worried about their kids. And I was actually allowed to go to the museum by myself at 6 and 7 years old. So I'd go out of the house, go down the elevator, out across Park and Madison, across Fifth Avenue, into the museum, just wander around. And the paintings there were always fascinating to me. In those days, there was no modern art there.
Okay.
The Met had no modern art. It was all Renaissance art, early art and art from, archaeological art. But it always energized me. It's always interesting. I was, studied it and looked at it.
So would you say that is what pushed you to start being creative and artistic, or were you that way before and seeing the art at the museum just sort of intensified it?
I've always felt it's just part of my nature, and it's something even now after, however many years I've been doing this, almost 60 years. I still don't know what really motivates me. It's just something that I need to do. It isn't something I actually thought about. The only thing with art that I thought about, I remember there was kind of a moment when I was 17. And I was out in San Francisco under some odd circumstances, and there was something that just came over me and said, I'm going to be an artist. So that was kind of a moment of deciding that was going to be a profession, something serious, a main drive of my life, rather than something I just did all the time.
So were you in San Francisco during the boom, of that, late 60s, early 70s?
That was 67.
Okay.
That was 1967. So at that time, one of the most influential things in my art occurred at that time, because in San Francisco and Berkeley, at that time, there were posters, psychedelic posters. And I just loved those things. I just loved that. So I started trying to kind of do that kind of artwork, and I could never really wrap my head around it. I could never make something that looked like that. It was always some kind of weird, odd variation on it. I wasn't much into posterizing, doing advertising or anything like that. The lettering wasn't that interesting, other than the way it was drawn. But all that curvilinear stuff, all of the kind of energetic, drippy, all of that kind of thing, those kinds of forms, I just loved them, and I really wanted to be able to paint like that.
Cool.
So that was a major influence in my life.
Were you ever able to? Have you ever done poster art? since then?
I never did. I mean, it didn't interest me as a kind of a living or a way of doing that. It was just a formal inspiration.
Gotcha.
You know, I just like the shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I started doing my own painting, you know, that was kind of the way I went. But yeah, at that time I was doing drafting. And most of the stuff I did in high school was drafting. I was designing cars, I was designing airplanes, like really tight pencil work,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that kind of illustrations and that kind of thing. I spent a lot of time doing that. I guess I like to draw the things that I wanted to own.
Gotcha.
You know, that was just some way of, I drew drum sets before I could have a drum set. You know, I always wanted to play drums. I played drums all my life. And, you know, before I had drum set, I was drawing pictures of drum sets. So, you know, this is like kind of the goal. This is what I wanted, you know, and I could kind of have it if I drew it.
Uh-huh.
You know?
Gotcha. So what was your first move into making art your profession?
Well, I mean, you know, I was in school, in college, and I mean, in high school it was all drafting. And in college, I was taking art classes right off the bat. I was actually in engineering to start off. I was going to be in aerospace engineering because I wanted to design airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, flying has always been an interest to me. But that didn't work out for me. It just wasn't my temperament.
Gotcha.
I wasn't very good at math. You know, it didn't work out. So I wound up kind of at loose ends, and that's when I wound up going to San Francisco after my dropped out of my freshman year, went out to San Francisco, kind of hung out there trying to get my head together. Came back, and I kind of, you know, my mother didn't really encourage me to be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she wanted me to be a professional person. So it took me till my senior year looking at my record and seeing that all of my other courses that I was taking, I was in journalism, I was in philosophy, all of those courses, you know, I was getting B's and C's, and in all of my art classes I was getting A's.
Mm-hmm.
So in my senior year I said, I should be an art major. So I converted to being an art major, and spent my whole senior year in college just painting. So I graduated with a degree in art ultimately, and that worked out. So, I mean, at that point, I mean, that was what I was doing. That's what I thought I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I was a painter when I was in college. I mean, I was a painter. You know, but the reality was that you know, I wound up getting married and having a child at 20 years old, and having to make a living. And you know, when I came out of school, I went to work. The only place I could find work was at an art supply store, so I was selling art supplies,
Right.
you know, instead of paintings. And even right from the beginning, I mean, even this, we're talking 1969, 1970, even before I graduated in 71. I was doing abstract artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And so even at that point, I mean, I was not doing anything that was really saleable, not easily saleable.
Okay.
So that was a rough road. So I had to find some other things to do. So I got into technical illustration as a profession.
What does that entail?
It's textbooks, illustrating textbooks.
Wow.
So that's what I did. I did that for 15 years. And through the first part of my career there, I was all by hand.
Mm-hmm.
It was all with rapidograph pens and French curves. And you do the drawings on Mylar, you do the color separations.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they printed the chemistry textbooks, physics textbooks, all the little diagrams.
Right.
That were in all those textbooks, even all the math diagrams, all those ones with the curves,
Uh-huh.
those were all done by hand. Those
Wow.
were, you know, they were done, you plot the formula, you do a layout on tissue, you plot the formula, you put your Mylar on top, and you trace with ink and get your final result. You paste on all the little numbers and letters and arrows and all the little symbols. So I did that for a while, and then the computer came along. Computer graphics started to come of age, and then I got into the computer graphics side of things at this company I worked for in Boston. I lived in Boston. I was up there 18 years. And so I kind of migrated into the computer side of things, and my fine art work I did as my private profession, and the computer stuff I started doing just to make money, because you made better money as a computer person than you did as a graphic artist.
Was it a big jump for you to go from doing those diagrams by hand then onto the computer?
No, I didn't find that difficult. I mean, I learned programming. I mean, I had a facility for programming in the computer. I had a feel for the computer, so I had no problem with the computer. The technical side of things, I enjoyed it. I mean, it was like puzzle solving, and I like puzzle solving. So that was it was good. It was fine. It wasn't what my life was about, and I never felt that job, any job that that earned money, was really what my life was about. It was just a way of earning money, meeting my responsibilities, supporting my family, raising my kids, and so on. But painting has always been what I considered what I do. It's the thing that I try to I think of legacy. I mean, that's what I hope my life was mostly about.
Gotcha.
I mean, I have two wonderful children, and certainly being a father is, an important thing. It's been a very important thing, being a husband. So I could never go that route of just being, solo artist, completely obsessed with art, and, not having private life or having very difficult private life. I put a lot of stock in being a good husband, being a good father, and being a good human being. So I've spent a lot of my life doing that, and art kind of dovetails with that. It's helpful in that regard. I've found because you have to see yourself. I mean, it's an exercise in self-observation, really, when it comes down to it. And if you want to, I've always felt that if you want to do real art, honest art, that you need to see everything, have no blinders on, understand who you are completely. And in order to understand who you are completely, I felt that spiritual work, meditation, and that kind of practice was required. So that's always been the integral part. It's always been the underlying part of the way I do art. Art is a manifestation. It's not an end in itself. It's a process. It's something that you bring yourself to, but it's not something that creates you.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how I'd like to maybe hear you go into that even a little bit more. Did you notice a change in your work in terms of art when you started to implement those practices of like meditation and or when you came to that particular realization?
I think it was a pretty gradual process, because I think art was a kind of meditation for me even before I got involved in the group work. I joined groups that did that and learned practices and whatever. So it wasn't kind of a solo thing. I've always had a teacher. Right back to 73. So that's 2 years after I came out of school, I got involved in that. So there really wasn't a period. There wasn't much of a period where I was doing art before meditation and doing art after it. And art was kind of a meditation even then. I could see it as a way of exploring things that you couldn't see. I mean, that's why I'm an abstract artist. The world is a spectacularly beautiful place. But I've never felt the need to interpret it. For me, the landscape of art was a place where you couldn't see, something that had no visual representation. There's no visual representation of psychology, right? Or the spiritual world. If you want to differentiate between them, I don't differentiate between them. I think they're seamless. But the only way I could do that really was in this abstract way, to kind of produce forms that implied the existence of things that were not seen. So it's a kind of a struggle, because it's a whole process of understanding things, right? Because psychology doesn't have any visual reference, right? So you have to have a vocabulary, and you develop a vocabulary. But there's always been a question in my mind as to how rigorous is this vocabulary. I mean, what is this vocabulary really communicating, or does it communicate anything? I mean, even today I have quite a doubts about whether anything meaningful is communicated through my painting. But I keep at it.
Yeah, we all have to.
Right.
So, man, I had a question and I just totally lost it. Well, as you were coming up and starting on, I'll see if I can remember it later. Were there artists that inspired you?
Yeah, very definitely. When I finally did see the work of the Surrealists, because kind of the psychedelic art and moving, is related to Surrealism in many ways. It's kind of an outgrowth of Surrealism. It's kind of Art Nouveau, Deco, all of that kind of mushed together. The way it was practiced in San Francisco anyway at that time. But when I saw the work of the abstract Surrealists, I just lit up. I mean, for me, when I first saw Kandinsky, it was just a mind-blowing experience for me. So Kandinsky, Miro, and then a little later on, it was Arshil Gorky. So my first wife's grandfather was an artist, Berliuk, and he was friends with all of these other artists, the abstract expressionists and the surrealists in New York City. He lived in New York City in the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s.
Wow, okay.
And so when I started dating in college, I started dating his granddaughter, and I'd go to his house, and he had died in 67, and I started dating her in 68, 69. So
Okay.
I just missed him.
Right.
I never met the painter Berlier. But his work was everywhere in the house. But he also had work of all of these other artists, because he traded with them, and there were paintings of theirs in the closets. I mean, you'd go into the closets and pull these paintings out. And Arshil Gorky was one of the pieces of artwork that hung in the living room. There's a little piece, about 16 by 20 that was hung in the living room. And I used to sit on the sofa there, and that painting, I mean, I couldn't take my eyes off that painting. It was just riveting to me. And so, I mean, that's how I became exposed to that whole family of artists, the surreal, the abstract surrealists. And so my practice really, my whole process became that, that kind of legitimized it for me. I mean, I was doing it anyway. You kind of go into a state and you just kind of you use automatic writing or whatever, it's this automatic process where the forms come out without any kind of preconception, right? There's no intellectual component, right? Leave out the intellectual stuff. And you try and find some other place where these forms can come from. So that's a whole process. Meditation practices, obviously help that. But those guys were doing that. That's where that stuff was coming from. They were all doing that same kind of thing. So that was my family. I mean, to this day, I still, although Arshil Gorky's, life was very different than mine, and he, a lot of the formal elements were things from his life. They were kind of elements of his life. I still feel that he was like my most kindred spirit. So, you know, in the art world. So I mean, I love his paintings more than any other artist that I've ever seen.
So when did you start, like having your art out there in galleries and maybe like making some money off of your paintings?
Well, I had my first group show in 1969, so I was still in college. But I was dating Ginny Girlyuk, and obviously they had connections with galleries, and her mother's best friend ran a gallery in Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island, and so she offered me an opportunity to show a painting or two in one of the group shows. So that was my first group show. You know, it didn't sell, you know. But I didn't show a lot. I was very shy. I mean, a very, very shy person growing up, and very insecure about my work. And so I was unable really to promote my work for most of my life. I mean, it was just something that when opportunity came, you know, I would seize on it. But I never peddled my art. I never went from gallery to gallery trying to show it. I was just too little insecure about it. I mean, I'm much better now. If I go around and I'm going to galleries, you know, I'm quick to pull out my phone and say, you know, here's blah blah blah, and show stuff. I mean, I've showed over the years. I mean, I've had shows. You know, '71. I was out in Wenatchee, Washington, and I had a big show at a bank out at Wenatchee, Washington. And I was doing this whole bunch of canvases all rolled up there they were unstretched canvases that I did out there, big, larger ones, and you know, just occasionally would have shows. Some of them were bigger than others, and I've sold pieces over the years. You know, I've gotten you know, $1,000, a couple $1,000 for pieces of artwork over the years, here and there, now and again. Somebody gets turned on by it and is willing to spring for it, but I've resigned myself to the idea that it's really, you know, my work is very like you know, John Coltrane's jazz.
Okay.
It's going to have a limited audience because it's not something that, if you have no exposure to art, you can't walk up to it and get much from it. You know, it's something that you need to be tuned to. You need to kind of sensitize yourself to certain kinds of shapes and colors and movement, so that you begin to recognize and have it resonate. You know, I mean, a landscape is very easy because everybody resonates with nature. So if you paint something from nature that's recognizable, it can be appreciated on many levels. Somebody who has no art background at all can appreciate it, that, you know, they recognize trees and they recognize houses and lakes and all of these things, and they don't have to go past that. They can get pleasure from that because it reminds them of what they see, and they already have emotional hooks, emotional sensors to that kind of thing. My work there's no reference point for them. Right? You want to walk up to it and you want to find something in it that you recognize. Right? But Kandinsky, in his writing, made it his whole exercise in his painting was to create forms that were not recognizable. You could not associate them with anything in nature, and yet you get an emotional kick. Why? I went to the MoMA one time. There were 3 Kandinskys hanging in the lobby. Tall paintings, skinny paintings, about 6 feet high each one, maybe a foot and a half wide. I went up to one of them, and I was standing, I don't know, 3 feet away, and I was looking at an area maybe a foot square, and there was just some shapes drawn, right? And I began to cry. I mean, there was something so exquisite in that, what he had painted, that it overwhelmed me. inexplicable.
Yeah. Yeah, and what else could
You know?
what else could do that in that way?
You know.
Wow.
So it's possible. I mean, these things are possible, but obviously it's not for everybody. It's not something that's going to happen for somebody who's never seen abstract art before or seen very little of it. You know, for that to be able to pull that out of an abstract painting.
Mhm. So, going from abstract painting, we're sitting here in your studio, our first on-location episode. So, bringing it up to the present, what kind of things are you working on now? What inspires you now? Has it even changed?
Well, the effort is the same. I mean, my purpose is the same.
Mm-hmm.
When I stand up in front of a canvas, blank canvas, I'm still working in the same process. I simply empty myself. I just have no thoughts about what's going to happen. I don't try to anticipate it. You know, one of the things I learned long ago, read one artist said, you know, copying yourself is the end of your art.
Mm.
And I've been very rigorous in that. I took that to heart. That was something that just resonated with me, and I said, okay, I'm never going to copy myself. And so when I stand up to a painting, I try not to have any kind of preconception about what's going to happen. There are limits to that because you need to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, depending on the technique, there'd be more or less starting points. So the paintings I'm doing now are on unprimed canvas,
Okay.
and I start with a stain. So I'll soak the canvas down. I use a water tension breaker, which makes the color bleed out a lot, so I get a soft look. And I'll work on the floor on big paintings like this,
Okay.
and I'll just start putting color. But you know, you have to make a choice. Okay, what color am I going to start with?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Already you've made a choice. But I'm not going to. I don't come in and say, okay, I'm going to make a blue painting today, or I'm going to make a red painting today, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll choose it at the moment. I'll look at the palette. I'll look at the painting. Whatever color pops into my mind, say, okay, that's where I'm going to start. But I have to, you know, I'm starting with a background. I know I'm starting with a background. I'm not starting with a drawing. So choices have to be made. I mean, over the years, I've approached my work in a lot of different ways, and I'm not bound to any particular way. Some days I'll start with a drawing. So I'll take a canvas and I'll take my little squeeze bottle of black paint, and I'll wet the canvas down, and I'll just start drawing with the bottle. So I'll do a drawing. It's the same way I would take a piece of paper and work with a marker or a pencil.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times I'll just take a brush with, you know, a bigger brush, and I'll just go to my palette, and I'll just start putting blocks, just areas of color on. So there's no drawing to start with a drawing. You start with blocks of color.
Mm-hmm.
Right, or in this case, I start with a background, and I'll start throwing paint on there, right? All those things are paint there. I just flail away. I just get my hands in my palette and get all covered with water and paint, and I just start splashing colors in different places.
Mm-hmm.
So I get this, you know, kind of energetic field. It's almost like my quantum field, right? My underlying energy field
Mm-hmm.
into which I can draw. So things happen. Dots happen, shapes form, there are masses that form, there are color areas that bleed out and form, and it's impossible to ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
So they do become integrated into the drawing. So there's a certain amount of randomness in that. So I have to make choices in that regard. To how much randomness, how much accident do I want in my work, and how much intent do I want in my work?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a balance between those two. And I try not to go too much towards the accidental, because it's just not the way I work. I mean, many artists, you know, they're abstract artists in particular, will rely on the accident. They'll rely on the properties of the paint You know, how it flows, how it bleeds, those kinds of things that are accidental features, and that's fine. That's a way of working. I mean, it's a way of revealing truth, right? Because accident, there's no really, in my mind, there's no such thing as accident.
Okay.
So whatever happens, if it happens accidentally, it's really intended by greater reality,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's some validity in that, yes. But to me, it comes out too not human enough. I mean, I want my stuff to be universal, but I also want it to be human universal. Because the human being, to me, is fully and totally integrated into the whole. The distinctions we make about ourselves are really imaginary. You know, they're tricks of perception. So that's the arena, right? That's the arena I love to work in.
Learning, I guess, an artist's process can help me to appreciate and understand their pieces. And not to say that I didn't before, but learning that process and being in arts too is always very interesting to me, about how we're all on a similar path of creating something from ourselves that's meaningful, and that's always very interesting to me. Do you you mentioned Coltrane before. Do you play music while you're doing art? Do you have music playing, or do you just work in silence?
Never. Silence. Okay. I find I'm very sensitive to music, and I can't not listen to it when it's playing. So it would draw off so much energy that I'd really be unable to paint. I mean, I have to have 100% of myself in a painting. You know, when I start a painting and I work on a painting, 3 or 4 hours, I would feel like I can't do anymore. I mean, I'm done. I'm drained, right? I get like this weird feeling that I'm not even whole anymore. You know, it's a strange feeling, but I have to stop and then I have to go back and work on it. You know, I can't just work on something for a long period of time. So my output, you know, I don't crank out that much work. I don't do that much work. On the whole, I mean, I've been painting for 17. That's 52 years. And then I don't have that many paintings. Maybe 1,000 paintings, a couple of thousand paintings. Over 52 years. Brodew painted between 20 and 30,000 paintings in his lifetime.
Wow.
So, I mean, that guy cranked out some
Yes,
artwork.
he did.
And I guess that's the reason why. I mean, I can't work that many hours on it. It's so draining for me. It's so strenuous for me somehow, psychologically.
Well, I mean, just knowing what I've seen of yours, what that tells me is just the amount of care you put into each piece that does show. And, you know, I think about it in terms of quality rather than quantity. So, yeah.
Thank you for that.
No, definitely. So now, what kind of, mainly, what kind of paints do you use?
Okay, so I'm an acrylic painter.
Okay.
I mean, when I was in school, I painted with oils. I mean, you know, any real artist used oil colors, and there was a bias,
right?
Especially in the 60s and 70s when acrylic paint was just becoming popular. A lot of the color field painters used acrylic paint because you could work on bare canvas and you needed stain. If you stain a canvas with oil color, 50 years later, it's just going to come apart. The oil will eventually eat the canvas, so you can't work on an unprimed canvas with oil.
Okay. Yeah.
So, so the color field painters in New York, turned to acrylics, and they were brand new in the 50s. when they started using them.
Mm-hmm.
I work very fast. I like to work very quickly because I work intuitively. I like to work very quickly. Some of my earlier works, I've got layers and layers of glaze. They're really quite thick,
Mm-hmm.
glossy, thick applications of paint. And the only way to do that in any kind of reasonable amount of time, to do a lot of glazing, was to use water-based medium that would dry quickly. And I even use a hairdryer. I have a hairdryer. The acrylic paints aren't even fast enough for me. I like to put a glaze down, dry it with the hairdryer, put another glaze,
Mm.
and work quickly. And I discovered this box, which is the most wonderful thing. Not to advertise a product, but a Mastercraft or whatever it is, it has a little box that you put your palette in,
Okay.
and you can close it airtight.
Oh, wow.
And man, that saved me a fortune.
I could
Because
imagine.
I can put out a palette of paint, and it'll last me 2 or 3 weeks.
That's really
Instead
cool.
of one day.
Yeah.
And
No,
I
I
have to put
didn't.
out new paint every day.
Yeah, I didn't
And the
know
other
about
advantage
that.
is if I want to spend 5 minutes painting or 10 minutes painting, I got a little thing, and it's I look at my I have my door open and I look at my paintings all the time as I walk into my my little office there.
Okay.
So I'm constantly assessing a painting that's on the easel,
Mm-hmm.
and I walk by it and I'll look at it, and then I'll go and do something, come back and I'll look at it, and then it'll say, oh, something's needed up here, and I'll say, okay, I know what I need to do, and I'll come in. Now I can just pop the cover off and paint.
Mm-hmm.
Right, spend 15 minutes setting up a palette and starting
Right.
to paint, doing all this stuff. So that's great. Anyway,
I have been working the past couple of days on a mural project in acrylics, and I've been going through paint, and now I don't have to.
it doesn't hold much. I mean, obviously, if I'm doing a large painting like this, I can use up the paints.
Right.
But it's amazing. I mean, you can just keep squeezing stuff out, and they stay dry. Even the areas where you've mixed color, the thin layers, the
Mhm.
special paper that you use in there, special palette paper,
Right.
and even the little mixed areas where they're very thin, they're still wet when you go back. So then, anyway, that was a little bit about how I interact with the paintings over time, because I'll do a painting. It doesn't matter what size it is. I'll usually get it to a point where it's structurally mostly composed and it's there,
Mm-hmm.
so I know what it is that I'm working on within 2 or 3 hours.
Okay.
But sometimes I'll have it up on my easel for 3 or 4 weeks, and I'll tweak it. I'll do this
Mm-hmm.
because it's a weird phenomenon that I've discovered. There are paintings that I'll start, and I'll get to a point where they're not done. Clearly, they're not done, and I don't know what to do. I don't understand the painting.
Mm.
So I don't know where to go with it. And I can sit and I can stare at it and stare at it and stare at it, and I just don't know what to do with it. So sometimes I'll have to set them aside. And sometimes I'll start another piece and I'll work on smaller pieces, and I'll kind of come back. But that's that process of looking at it. I have to look at it until I understand it. And then one day I'll come in and I'll sit down and I'll look at it, and right away I know exactly what to do.
Mm.
So it's almost like I have to grow into the piece, which is the wonderful thing. I mean, for me, when I start a painting, I want to see something I've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process of complete discovery, right? I want to be surprised by what's there.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this weird balance of kind of understanding what's there, but not understanding what's there.
Has a painting of yours ever, because, prefaces with this is that, again, I can relate in terms of learning to not rush a piece of art. I will put something aside rather than rush it and, not be super happy with it, and I have gone back to things. Was there any time when you clearly knew at the beginning of a piece your direction, or is it always a journey?
It's funny that this piece here, Axis, which my wife will not let me sell.
Okay.
I mean, I did that piece in probably 4 or 5 hours, and never went back to touch it. It was done.
Mm.
It came out completely whole, completely finished, and one of the better paintings I've done. So that is kind of a sign,
Yeah.
right? There are the paintings that I find the easiest to do are almost always the best paintings.
Mm.
The ones I struggle with, some of them never come right. You know, and I'll just never be happy with them. I'll look at them and I say, just don't show it to me. I don't want to see it.
Right.
You know. And oddly enough, I mean, I've got paintings that I did. You know, I'm never really happy with a piece. I mean, I'm kind of, when it's done, I'm happy with it, generally speaking. You know, and I'm usually happy with parts of it more than other parts of it.
Mm.
So it always seems like a process. I firmly believe that I haven't done my best work yet. I mean, I'm
Gotcha.
turning 70 in September.
No, it's still
and
time.
I haven't done my best work yet.
Mm.
This is. I always feel this is better. This is better than anything else I've done in the past. But sometimes it's funny. I go back and I look at a painting I did in the 80s or 90s or something,
Right.
and I'll say, "Boy, that wasn't as bad as I thought." I actually like it better now.
Right.
You know, when I'm that kind of distance, it isn't me anymore that did it. You know,
Right.
so I'm not really criticizing myself when I'm looking at a piece. This is kind of just an objective piece. It's not really me.
Right.
And from a more objective point of view, it's not as bad as I remembered.
Right. Gotcha.
So it's a weird relationship you have
Yeah.
with your own work.
Yeah.
You know.
It definitely is. And just to wrap up, where can people who are listening, where can they find your work? If they want to maybe buy a print or just look at other things.
I have some pieces on Saatchi, SaatchiArt.com.
Okay.
I've got a few pieces on Fine Art America. I have a website
Mm.
which has my email address on it so that they can contact me.
Okay.
So it's dgilbert.net. www.dgilbert.net is my artistic website.
Mm.
And I'd love to get email from anybody, comments or anything.
Cool.
And I do post on Facebook, Artwork of Doug Gilbert on Facebook.
Okay.
So I do post on Facebook. I'm not a big Facebook person.
Right.
I mean, I do it in spurts, you know.
Gotcha.
But, you know, there might be a month where I won't be on there at all.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad I caught
It
you
just
when you
eats
were on there.
It just eats, I don't know. I find it just eats my energy emotionally.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, I'm
draining.
not a social person
Mm.
on the whole. You know, I mean, I can socialize and
Right.
do small talk and all that stuff, but it's not something that I kind of seek out. I don't need it.
It makes you think it's a necessary evil. You know, it is a means to promote your
Yeah.
work.
I think it's a false euphoria that you get from people liking your work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very dangerous for an artist to measure their value and interpret what they're doing or try and steer what they're doing based on what people like.
Mm.
So it's a real temptation, and I'm subject to it too. I'm a victim of it, or you know,
Right.
succumb to it also. You know, if I post a painting,
Right.
you know, I keep checking back. How many people like this painting?
Right.
But in the end, even if 150 people like it, it doesn't do anything for me.
Mm-hmm.
There's something empty about that.
Yeah.
So there has to be an interior criteria to measure what you're doing. You just have to be honest and stay with yourself. And I mean that's from the beginning. I mean that was the whole. That may have been the original goad for me to get into spiritual work, because I knew that I couldn't think my way into a good painting.
Mm.
I mean, from very early on, 16, 17 years old, I got interested in meditation when I was 16. I read Alan Watts and Zen meditation, but I didn't get involved with anything until what was I, 22 or 23. But I knew that in order to do honest work and to do universal work, right? I didn't want my paintings to be my personality.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't interesting to me. I didn't feel the need to have myself on a canvas out there for people to say yes, no, yes, no.
Right.
Right. There was something else. I wanted something else. I wanted not me on the canvas.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you get not me on the canvas? Right? So that's the challenge, right, for me. And I'm sure there's many artists that are engaged in the same enterprise.
Right.
So my way of doing it was to learn how to be not me as a person. Right? So you have to bring the universal, find the universal.
Mm-hmm.
Not to bring the God word into it, but there's an element there. You want to kind of be able to kind of join yourself with something larger, but not in a mental way, right? It doesn't work if it's in your head.
Right.
Something real has to happen to you, and it's going to change you, right? It changes the way you see your life. It changes the way you see the world. That's the real part. So that's terrifying, because not me is not me, right? And you want to protect me,
Right.
And it fights hard to be protected. And our culture is just saturated with meanness.
Yeah.
Everybody. I think there's more people. It's funny. The population. You don't think of it. But the number of people on the planet is so much larger now than it was when I was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? I mean, in New York City, there were probably only a couple of thousand practicing artists when I was a young person in New York City in the 50s. Right? There's probably 100,000, 200,000. I mean, A.C. Moore sells art supplies, so that it's something that millions of people are doing.
Right.
Right? So it's trying to make yourself unique, that whole drive, there's this thing of trying not to be anonymous, trying to make yourself unique, just focuses people back on themselves, and they try to be unique. So there's all kinds of effort to be, a unique self, which sets me at odds to that in a sense, right? Because my whole purpose is to be as ununique as possible. It's to be, right?
That's
I
interesting.
want to be absorbed. I want to be just part of everything.
It's funny you bring up Alan Watts, because we just both came into a whole somebody made a whole collection of his talks that we're just starting to venture into. Isaac slightly more than me. I'm a little behind it, but yeah, we just started getting into that. So it's
I mean, it's very easy to read these things practice a little stuff that kind of it's hinted at.
Mm-hmm.
And you go along and you do that for a little while, and then something else will come up and say, oh, this is interesting too. And you start reading about some other teacher. You know, you read Baba Ramdas and, you know, or Muktananda, or, you know, this is suddenly you do a little Hindu thing, or do a little Sufi thing, and you do a little, you know, Zen thing.
Right.
And you get the impression that you're actually learning something. But in my experience, and it's been quite a few years, you never get anywhere that way. Right? It's you never rise above a certain level because you've never committed yourself to getting a result. You've never committed yourself to actually changing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want to add it like a coat, something that you can talk about, you know, something that you can imagine as part of you, like a piece of clothing you put on.
Right.
But it isn't like that, right? The real thing is your body changes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the clothes anymore, right? The clothes don't matter at all. It's what happens is on the interior side, where the whole interior thing of your whole interior changes, and the world doesn't look the same as it did before. It simply doesn't look the same. When you look at it, it's not the same as before you started. You know what I mean?
I do.
Not an
Yeah.
idea that changes, not the idea of what the world is that changes. It's actually the way you see it. Your filters for what you see change.
Wow.
And we just got.
And I'll tell you, that hurts. And it's frightening. And you want to run away from it. And it's exactly the time when you got to stick with it. Because when you want, you know, if you let yourself run away from it, you stay the same level. You'll get to the end of your life and you'll be the same person you were when you started.
Wow. What were you going to say?
Yeah, you know, just like the whole like reality thing. It's all pretty much just hit or miss from like what an individual's like biological sort of senses, their hard work and interpret. But is, you know, everyone just has their own interpretation. It's not like the legit truth, so to speak. You know, we all have our own sort of take on it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we are. We're filters.
Yep.
Right? So you want to change the filters.
Wow.
And the person that sees the most is the person that has the least filters. You know? And how far is it possible for a human being to not have filters? I mean, you couldn't function if you didn't have filters. So some of the filters have to stay. Right? But they don't have to dominate your life. Got off track there.
No, that's fine. No, that was amazing. I guess we'll end on that very big note. I'll thank you again, Doug, for doing this. This was super, super cool.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Planet Shivers podcast. This production and others can be found on iTunes, SoundCloud, and archives.org. It can also be found with video content on the Albert Shivers YouTube channel. You can find even more content on Facebook at Albert Shivers Visual Artist and on Instagram at Albert Shivers. You can find Isaac Wilson's work on Instagram at WhenInZen. That's when_in_zen. Thank you again for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
What is that creaking noise?